At exactly 2 in the morning, Donovan Hale walked down to the kitchen and froze. In front of him, under the thin glow of a warm light, a young girl was quietly washing dishes. The pile looked like it came from a huge party. Her hands were red and stinging so badly they trembled. She did not have a shift today. She should have been asleep at home hours ago. Yet here she was, working in silence in the middle of the night, with a cookbook open beside the sink and a page soaked with water. In just a few seconds, Donovan understood he had stepped into a moment that could change her life. Nights in Donovan Hale's mansion always carried a familiar silence, something like the long breath of a place too large and too empty of people. He was successful, experienced, and had everything others wished for, but his private life was so hollow that sometimes he could not remember the last time he truly laughed. In recent years, he often struggled with sleeplessness. Pressure built with age, with business deals, and with memories he rarely dared to reopen. When sleep refused to come, he would go down to the kitchen for cold water to clear his mind. It was always the same pattern: footsteps, lights, quiet. But tonight was different. When he stepped into the kitchen, the small yellow light above the sink cast a shadow of someone standing there. A small, thin figure bent over the water. The steady sound of running water mixed with the soft clinking of dishes, like someone trying to make everything as quiet as possible so no one would wake up. He narrowed his eyes a little. The person standing there was Naomi, the young cleaning lady who had only been working for a month. She only came in the mornings. At this hour, she should have been at home, wrapped in a blanket, sleeping peacefully like any other 19-year-old girl. Instead, she was hunched over a mountain of dishes. Naomi had a small frame, her hair tied neatly behind her. Her hands were red and burning, probably from the hot water. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were trying too hard to stay calm. She wore earphones with soft music playing, but as soon as Donovan took one more step, she jumped so hard she almost dropped the plate in her hand. The plate slipped from her fingers and made a small sound that drained the color from her face. That was not the reaction of someone doing normal work. It was the reaction of someone afraid of being caught. Donovan spoke gently, trying not to scare her more. "Naomi, why are you here at this hour?" She froze for a few seconds, then lowered her head and said in a shaky voice, "I couldn't sleep, so I came to finish tomorrow's work early. Just to make things easier." Her words were as soft as a breath, but enough for Donovan to hear the truth behind them. It was a clumsy lie. He had lived long enough to read what people hid in their eyes, and Naomi's eyes were telling him there was something much bigger she was trying to cover up. He stepped closer to the sink, planning to see if anything was out of place. That was when he noticed the small notebook beside her. Its cover was worn, the edges curled as if it had been opened thousands of times. When Donovan happened to look at the page left open, he paused. Inside were not work notes, not a list of things to clean. They were handwritten recipes, the letters slightly slanted and young but careful. There were sketches of dishes, small colored notes, and little reminders she wrote to herself. Across the middle of the page was a wide, blurry stain, a stain that had once been a tear. Donovan looked up at Naomi. She kept washing dishes, trying to look calm, but her shoulders were trembling. Suddenly, he realized Naomi was not just washing dishes. She was practicing her knife skills. Every piece of vegetable was trimmed and cut into even shapes. Behind her was a pile of scraps, proof she had been standing there for hours. This 19-year-old girl was not just a cleaning lady doing dishes. She was quietly practicing the skills of someone who once had a dream in the kitchen. Donovan looked more closely. Each movement of her knife showed care, a bit of habit that came from some kind of class, not from a regular part-time job. Someone who only washed dishes would never need to cut vegetables that neatly. He asked gently, "What dish are you getting ready for?" Naomi froze. She put the knife down, her hands shaking a little. She tried to smile, but it didn't come out. I'm just trying to tidy up the kitchen." Clearly, that wasn't true. When he pressed a bit deeper, Naomi avoided his eyes. Her voice dropped. "Please, don't tell anyone I came here at this hour. I just wanted to finish tomorrow's work early." Donovan looked at her for a long moment. A normal person would never ask something like that. Only someone hiding a fear would. He nodded, saying nothing more. But in his eyes, a question was starting to grow. When Donovan left the kitchen, the hallway returned to its usual silence. But this time, that silence was no longer peaceful. It felt heavy, pressing against his shoulders. He went back to his room, but still couldn't sleep. The image of that recipe notebook kept returning to him. The blurred page, the blistered hands. A 19-year-old girl quietly repeating skills she should have been confident enough to use in the open, not practicing in the dark at 2 in the morning. He understood that feeling better than anyone. Not the exhaustion, not the lack of sleep, not the effort of trying to work harder than everyone else. It was the feeling of a dream left behind, while the heart still held on to it with both pride and pain. That night, Donovan lay in bed with his eyes wide open. He knew he had not just seen a young girl washing dishes. He had seen a dream struggling to breathe in a dark corner. And he understood. Donovan was awake almost the entire night. The image of Naomi standing under the warm yellow light, her trembling hands, and the recipe notebook stained with tears kept replaying in his mind like a slow-motion film. He didn't know if he was restless out of curiosity or something deeper. All he knew was that the next morning, when he walked down to the kitchen, he noticed every detail around that small girl. The moment Naomi bent down to lift the basket of vegetables, Donovan saw her quietly pull her hand back. Her fingers had several red marks, like mild burns from hot water. She tried to hide them in her pockets, but every time she tightened her grip on something heavy, the marks showed even more clearly. No one washed dishes normally and ended up with hands like that after a single night. He noticed something else too. When Chef Maribel walked over to grab the apron hanging on the hook, Naomi instinctively watched the fabric with a deep, lingering look. That wasn't simple admiration. It was the look of someone who once stepped into a kitchen with her whole heart but could no longer touch what she loved. Donovan stayed still, watching her, something pulling tight inside his chest. That feeling pushed him to speak. "Naomi," he called softly. She startled and turned around, her hands still hidden in her pockets. "Yes, do you need something?" He looked at her for a moment, then asked in a voice purposely light, almost casual. "You like cooking, don't you?" The question hit her like it knocked the air out of her. She froze for a long time, her eyes dropping to the kitchen floor before she finally murmured, I used to want to learn to cook for real." Her answer fell into place like a missing piece. But it was only the surface of something much deeper. Naomi said nothing more, but Donovan knew too well the feeling of someone trying to avoid a wound. Her voice did not shake, yet her breathing was light and unsteady, like someone afraid that one more sentence would make her break down. He did not push further. He did not want to hurt her. But he knew something big had forced her to stop that dream halfway. That afternoon, while Naomi was arranging supplies in the storage room, something small fell out of her pocket. Donovan happened to see it. It was a cream-white triangular cloth with a stitched logo from a well-known culinary school on the corner. The edge was clean but worn, like something kept for a long time. Donovan recognized it instantly. This type of cloth was given only to students with outstanding performance, usually team leaders in the kitchen or top trainees in a program. Naomi quickly picked it up and stuffed it back into her pocket before anyone could look too closely. But Donovan had already seen enough to know this was not a simple love for cooking. She had studied culinary arts, and she had been very good at it. That realization pushed him to look deeper. That evening, he called Chef Maribel to the tea room and asked for her thoughts on Naomi's skills. Maribel frowned a little, then explained that she had caught Naomi a few times standing in front of the kitchen counter, watching her every movement like she was studying each step. She had also noticed that Naomi cut vegetables with proper technique, not the casual style of someone working part-time. "She has a real culinary background," Maribel concluded. "She's not a beginner." That information made Donovan even more certain that Naomi being in the kitchen at 2 in the morning was no coincidence. On the second night, what he suspected happened again. The soft sound of a knife hitting a cutting board drifted through the kitchen when Donovan went down for water. Not sharp or careless, but steady, slow, intentionally controlled. When he got closer, Naomi was carving a carrot into small flower shapes. On the counter was a pile of vegetable scraps. She had been standing there for hours. Beside her was the recipe notebook. This time, the page wasn't only stained with tears. There were smudged ink marks, like something had been wiped away too fast. Donovan watched the scene and knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped closer. His voice, "You love the kitchen this much. Why did you give it up?" Naomi stayed still. She set the knife down, her hands tightening together like she was holding herself in place so she would not fall apart. 1 minute passed, then 2. Just when Donovan thought she would stay silent, she finally spoke, her voice thin and strained. Trying hard isn't always enough, especially when your family needs you more. The whole kitchen seemed to go quiet. Naomi began to talk, slowly but clearly. Her father had passed away suddenly, just a few months earlier. Her mother lost her job because her health declined. The two of them had to leave their old apartment and move into a cheaper, cramped room. "I wanted to keep studying cooking so badly," she said, her eyes lowered to the notebook. "My instructor once said I had real potential, but the tuition was too expensive. I couldn't put that weight on my mom, so I quit." Donovan listened to every word, and it felt like her pain was pushing itself out of her chest. Not in a cry, but in the kind of hurt that makes someone sit still and try to keep their breathing steady. She added, "I wash dishes at night because I don't want anyone to see me practicing things that I'll never have the chance to chase again." She tried to smile, but her voice tightened. "I just want to keep a little piece of that dream, so I don't forget I once worked for it." Donovan stood silent at her confession. He looked at her hands, swollen and red from hot water. He looked at the recipe page, blurred by tears. He looked at a 19-year-old girl trying to hold on to her dream like someone clutching ashes in their palms. He understood too well what it meant to give up the thing you loved most for your family. He knew the helplessness of watching someone you care about need you and having to sacrifice the best part of yourself for them. He had lived through that, and the regret had stayed with him ever since. Now he saw that same story in Naomi, but in someone younger, more fragile and hurting even more. When she lifted her head, her eyes wet but trying hard to stay strong, Donovan felt something with absolute clarity. Naomi wasn't just the cleaning lady washing dishes. She was a young person fighting to keep a dream alive in the dark, alone, with no one noticing. And he knew this wasn't simply a story about cooking. This was a dream abandoned halfway, trying to hold on through every careful cut of vegetables at 2 in the morning. Tonight, Donovan understood that he hadn't stepped into Naomi's story because of curiosity. He stepped into it because he saw his own reflection in that girl. Naomi's words that night troubled Donovan more than he expected. The pain she tried to hide showed through every hesitant pause, every swallowed tear, every sentence she stopped halfway. This wasn't a story with just one cause. It was deeper, older, and far heavier than anything a 19-year-old girl should have to carry. Donovan knew he couldn't rely on assumptions. If he wanted to understand what had pulled Naomi away from her dream, he had to look for answers at the source. And he started with the person who knew Naomi best, her mother, Marion. That afternoon, Donovan drove to the small apartment where Naomi and her mother lived. It was an old building, walls peeling, the metal staircase giving off a thin squeak with every step someone took. He stood in front of the tiny room at the end of the hallway, took a long breath, and knocked. Marion opened the door and froze for a moment when she saw Donovan. Her first instinct was worry, afraid he was there to complain about her daughter, afraid Naomi had gotten into trouble at work. Her eyes were red and tired, but the way she held herself showed the dignity of someone trying to stay steady through hardship. "Hello, Marion. I'm Donovan, the homeowner where Naomi works," he began. She immediately bowed her head, her voice trembling with embarrassment. "If she did anything wrong, I'm sorry on her behalf. She tries so hard, but these days—" "No," Donovan interrupted gently. "I just came to check in, and to understand more about your situation." Marion froze for a moment, then looked away. In that brief silence, Donovan saw shame mixed with a deep sadness, as if she were trying to hide their real situation behind quiet restraint. "I don't want to trouble you," she said softly. "Our family hasn't been very lucky, and I don't want anyone thinking Naomi is weak or irresponsible." Donovan answered in a calm voice. "I didn't come to judge, I came to understand." Something in the way he said it made her soften. After a moment, she invited him into the small room. There was only an old wooden table, a few chairs, and a tiny kitchen corner. Nothing extra, nothing repaired, nothing that belonged to a comfortable life. When Donovan asked about Naomi's culinary training, Marion clasped her hands tightly. She took a long breath before speaking, her voice hoarse and full of guilt. "Back then, our family saved every bit we could. My husband was a mechanic, and I worked at a sewing shop. Life was hard, but still manageable. We had only one dream, to send Naomi to culinary school. She smiled at the memory, then the smile faded almost immediately. But my husband passed away suddenly. A car accident. Everything we saved had to be used for the funeral, and debts we never saw coming. Her voice began to tremble. I thought I could still keep Naomi in school, but my health got worse. I lost my job. Rent, food, everything fell on her shoulders. Tears slipped down her face. She tried to act fine, but she was hurting. She loves me, so she quit. Donovan went still, not because the story was tragic, but because of the way Marion spoke. It was the voice of a mother carrying guilt for surviving, knowing that her survival had pulled her child away from the future she deserved. Donovan knew there was one more person who could help him piece together what he was missing. Chef Roland, the instructor who taught Naomi. He went to the Culinary Institute and met Roland in the practice kitchen. Roland had sharp but warm eyes, the kind you see in chefs who have spent years in the heat and pressure of the line. When Donovan mentioned Naomi, Roland recognized the name immediately. That girl? Of course I remember. One of the most promising students I ever taught. Roland opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a few photos. They were pictures of Naomi during her final exam. Hair tied neatly, eyes bright, standing beside the dish she created with a smile full of pride. Roland handed the photos to Donovan. She's skilled, hardworking, creative, always stayed after class to practice more. Back then I thought if life were kinder, Naomi could go far in this field. Donovan stared at the photo of Naomi beaming beside her dish. It was a smile completely different from the tired face he saw at 2 in the morning. Roland looked at Donovan and said a sentence that tightened his chest. If things had been different, she could have become a great chef. It wasn't empty praise. It was the regret of a teacher who had watched real talent slip away. And Donovan felt that regret hit him harder than he expected. Leaving the culinary school, Donovan sat in his car for a long time. He thought about people like Naomi, people with real passion, real skill, but crushed by circumstances before they even had the chance to grow. People like her were never short on effort. They were only short on luck, and on someone reaching out at the right moment. Naomi's image pulled Donovan's old memories to the surface. He remembered being young, so poor he had to work 3 jobs at once. He remembered the moments he almost gave up, and how he would have if it weren't for his older brother, the one person who never let him forget his dream. His brother always told him, as long as one person believes in you, that's enough to push you forward. But then his brother passed away, and that loss drove Donovan to drown himself in work, until he forgot he once had dreams outside of money. Until he forgot there were people beside him who needed him. Now he saw himself in Naomi, full of potential, full of dreams, but knocked down by pain before she even had the chance to stand steady. Donovan understood that if he walked away, Naomi would never get a second chance. Not because she lacked effort, but because the hardship was simply too heavy. He didn't want history to repeat itself in such a cruel way. He didn't want to watch a talented young person stay stuck just because life had been unfair. He knew he couldn't change her past, but he was certain he could change her future. When he returned to the mansion, Donovan stood in the wide kitchen and thought of Naomi washing dishes at 2 in the morning. Not out of duty, but to hold on to the fading warmth of a dream. He knew exactly what he had to do. Donovan decided he would not let Naomi keep fighting alone in the dark. He knew he had to act, and this time he would see it through to the end. After meeting Chef Roland, Donovan returned home with a heart heavier but clearer than ever. He now understood Naomi's situation, the loss that forced her away from the path she loved. But what stayed in his mind the most was the image of that girl standing alone at 2 in the morning, carving vegetables, as if those tiny cuts were the last thread connecting her to her old dream. That was what told Donovan he could not let this story end in regret. The next morning, while Naomi was wiping the kitchen shelves, Donovan walked over and placed a few simple ingredients in front of her. Some vegetables, a bit of chicken, a few basic spices. He acted as if it were just a normal request, but the truth was, he wanted to see the part of her she kept hidden, the part life had forced her to bury. "Naomi," he said gently, "can you help me cook something simple? I'd rather try a home-cooked lunch today instead of calling the chef." Naomi froze. She looked at the ingredients, then at him, worry written all over her face. She was afraid she might not do well, afraid she might reveal too much, afraid the things she tried so hard to hide would show. But in the end, she nodded, maybe out of respect for him, Or maybe because somewhere deep inside, she still remembered what it felt like to stand in front of a stove. She started preparing the ingredients, and Donovan stepped back to observe. At first, Naomi was hesitant. Her hands shook a little, her movements slow and cautious. But after a few minutes, when the knife hit the cutting board, that familiar sound seemed to wake something inside her. Her hands grew more confident. Her knife strokes became steady, clean, and precise. Every cut was measured. Every motion was intentional, as if her body remembered everything even if her mind had tried to dust it away. Donovan saw the change clearly. He didn't need to say anything. He simply left the space open for her, letting her return to the dream she thought she had walked away from. A few minutes later, the kitchen filled with a soft, warm aroma. Naomi stood still in front of a pot of soup, gently simmering. Donovan recognized the smell the moment it spread. Chicken soup. A simple dish, but Naomi was cooking it with rare care. The way she held the ladle, adjusted the heat, tasted it bit by bit. It all showed that this wasn't just food. This was memory. Naomi looked at the pot of soup with a softened gaze, completely different from the guarded look she had used to hide her pain these past days. "This is the dish my dad used to make," she said quietly, without waiting for Donovan to ask. "Whenever my mom felt tired, he would cook this and say, 'Eat this and you'll feel lighter.' I miss this dish, and I miss him." Donovan didn't interrupt. He knew he was seeing a part of her heart that hardship had pressed down but could never erase. She placed the bowl of soup in front of him. Steam rose with a warm, gentle aroma. Donovan looked at her for a few seconds, then spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Dreams don't disappear, Naomi. They just wait for someone to wake them up." The words made her go still. Her small shoulders trembled, as if someone had touched the exact place she tried to hide. Before she could react, Donovan continued, "If you want, I will cover all your tuition so you can return to culinary school. And I'll help so your mother won't have to work as hard as before. You can focus on learning and on everything you once wanted." Naomi nhìn ông với đôi mắt mở to, như thể cô nghe nhầm. Sự bất ngờ khiến cô lùi một bước, hai tay siết chặt vào nhau, gương mặt chuyển từ bối rối sang hoảng sợ. Cô lắc đầu liên tục. "No. I can't accept that. I don't want to trouble you. I'm scared my mom will think I'm making other people take care of me. I don't want to owe anyone anymore." Her voice cracked on the last sentence. Donovan understood everything. He stepped a little closer and spoke slowly, letting each word land exactly where it needed to. "You don't owe anything, Naomi. This isn't charity. This is an investment in someone who deserves it. I'm doing this because I believe in you." She brought her hand up to cover her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, not the quiet tears she had held back for so long, but the kind that break free after too much weight. "You don't know how much I've missed the kitchen," Naomi said through shaky breaths. "There were nights I just wished I could cook one more time. Just once. That would have been enough." Donovan didn't interrupt. He simply placed his hand on the recipe notebook she always carried. "You're going to cook many more times," he said, soft as air. "And not in a dark kitchen at 2 in the morning." Naomi broke down in tears, but this time they were tears of hope. The days that followed felt like a dream she didn't dare believe was real. Donovan personally drove her to the culinary school to handle her enrollment. When Chef Roland saw her return, he opened his arms like he was welcoming someone back from a long battle no one else had seen. He shook Donovan's hand, said little, but his eyes held respect and gratitude. Many students were surprised to see Naomi walk in with bright, shining eyes that had been dim for so long. She didn't have to explain anything, didn't have to retell her story. Just by watching the way she held a knife, the way she stepped into the practice kitchen, everyone knew. She was back where she belonged. Naomi's days transformed completely. She trained late every night. Every time she mastered a new dish, she snapped a photo and sent it to Donovan. At first, the dishes were simple. Then they grew more complex, more beautiful, more complete. Donovan's kitchen slowly filled with those photos, turning into a small collection of a dream coming back to life. Every time Donovan looked at those photos, something in him felt lighter. Not because he had done something grand, but because he knew he had shown up in the right place at the right moment. A few months later, Naomi stood in front of the mirror wearing her new student uniform. The light reflected off her face. Her eyes were no longer tired, but full of belief. She smiled, a real smile, warm and full of life, the kind Donovan once thought she had lost forever. Inside that smile was a dream lit back to life. A dream that had never truly disappeared, only waited for someone kind enough to wake it. 6 months passed faster than Naomi expected. From a girl trembling in front of a stove at 2 in the morning, she had become one of the standout students in her class. Her instructors noticed the focus and determination in every knife stroke, every pot of broth, every step she took in the kitchen. Not because she wanted to prove something huge. She was simply holding on to the chance she once thought would never return. Naomi's mother, Marian, also felt her life shift into something gentler. With the support they received, she no longer had to juggle several jobs at once. Her mind steadied, her health improved. Every afternoon, she stood by the window of their small apartment, watching her daughter leave with a small backpack and a confidence she hadn't seen in Naomi since the day her husband died. In her eyes was relief, mixed with a quiet gratitude for the person who had brought light back into their lives. When the first phase of the program ended, the students were asked to create a dish that represented their culinary identity. Naomi knew exactly what she wanted to make. She spent days rewriting the recipe, testing versions, adjusting the presentation, and when it came time to choose the first person to taste it, there was only one name that felt right: Donovan. That day, she prepared everything herself in the familiar kitchen where she once washed dishes in the middle of the night. But today, she was not there to clean or to practice in secret. She stood there like a chef presenting her creation. Naomi carefully placed a white plate on the table, decorating every detail with a level of focus that made Donovan go still. On the plate was a fine dining version of the chicken soup her father used to make. Refined, elegant, keeping the core flavor but deeper in every way. When Donovan sat down, Naomi placed the plate in front of him. "I want you to try this," she said softly but with certainty. Donovan picked up the spoon and lifted a small scoop to his lips. After the very first second, he stopped. Something in the flavor struck deep into his memory and tightened his chest. He set the spoon down, looked at Naomi for a long moment, then said slowly, "You just turned a memory into something beautiful." Naomi lowered her head, but the corners of her lips lifted with emotion. She straightened after a few seconds, gathering every bit of courage to say what she had been holding in her heart for months. "I know you've helped me so much," she said, "but I want you to know I'm going to stand on my own. I want you to be proud of me because I earned it, not because you felt sorry for me." It was honest, every word of it. Her voice didn't shake, and her eyes didn't look away. The fear she once lived with was gone. In its place was the dignity of someone finally walking on the path they chose. Donovan looked at her and smiled, a rare smile, light as air. "I never felt sorry for you," he said. "I just saw what you deserved. You only needed a door. I simply opened it. The steps after that were yours." The kitchen fell quiet for a few seconds, but it was the kind of silence that felt beautiful, the kind that comes when a sad chapter finally closes, making space for something better. Naomi felt it too. And in that moment, she knew she no longer needed to step into the kitchen at 2 in the morning, hiding in the dark, trying to hold on to the fading warmth of an old dream. Now she was standing in the light, with a clear path and a future rebuilt through kindness and persistence. She returned to culinary school the next day with a completely different spirit. When she walked into the practice kitchen, the light caught her face and highlighted a new sense of confidence everyone noticed. That day, she opened the recipe notebook she had carried through everything. The old pages still had faint tear marks, but she didn't linger on them. Naomi slipped a fresh sheet of paper into the middle of the book and wrote her first words with a firm, steady hand. "The first dish of the future." The words were simple and unadorned. But to Naomi, they were a promise to herself, to her dream, and to the people who stood by her when she thought she had nowhere left to hold on to. That afternoon, when Donovan stopped by the culinary school to pick up a few photos of her latest dishes, he paused at the doorway and watched Naomi work. She didn't know he was there. She was simply living in the place her heart had always led her. The light on her face made Donovan realize with absolute certainty that his choice 6 months ago had been right. Not because he saved anyone, but because he believed in the right person. Kindness doesn't change the whole world overnight, but it can change one life. And sometimes, like Naomi, that is enough to make someone rise. That is how the story closes. Gentle, warm, and full of hope. Thank you for listening to the very end, and don't forget to support us by subscribing to the channel. We truly appreciate every bit of your support.